What's up, everybody? Welcome in episode 161 of the Robot Report podcast. I'm your host, Steve Crow, executive editor of the Robot Report. Thank you, as always, folks, for tuning into the program. Really appreciate it. Joined, as always, by Mr. Mike Oitzman, my partner in crime here. Didn't have a show this week or last week, Mike. I think both of us were a little too inspired by Atlas doing his push-ups, so we were a little too busy hitting the gym to do a show last week. How you doing, man?
Yeah, I was feeling a little soft and fat, Steve.
I mean, if the robots can do it, right? I mean, they're leading the way, right? We gotta at least keep up with them, right?
Before they take over the world.
Yeah.
So yeah, you were in Georgia last week. You went down to visit some of our friends down in that part of the world. How'd that go? What'd you learn?
Yeah, so it was Robo Georgia. It's a emerging cluster, I guess you could call it, down in the Georgia area, mainly in Atlanta at the moment. But they held their second annual Automating the ATL event, and they're trying to build an ecosystem down there. This is their, again, sort of way to get some people together, some early stakeholders in the area down there. They have some great logistics companies that are based down there. UPS. I actually interviewed their senior VP of operations technology, Joel Stenson, on stage to hear and learn all about how they're using robots at UPS and what the vision is for the future of robots there. So that was enlightening. It's really getting stakeholders like that. Some of the universities down there is at Georgia Tech, which is a great engineering school. Some robotics companies who have a presence down there. Mugen was down there. Slip Robotics had a couple of people there. So there are some pieces of the puzzle in place down there. But again, they're really just starting out. And we've had them at our Robo Business and Robotics Summit shows in the past. So I think they're taking pages from different playbooks, right? They know Mass Robotics. They know the Pittsburgh Robotics Network. They know the Denmark contingency. So they're trying to figure out, hey, how can we better promote everything that Atlanta has going on and all of Georgia to create something great down there. So again, they have a long way to go. I think they'll be the first ones to tell you that. But I was just there to show support to Milt Walker, Ward Broom, Aaron Prather is involved, and some other folks we've known for a number of years. But it's great to see all the energy that's down there, the training facilities. Kia gave a talk about how they're using robots in a new building that they're building down there for different vehicle production. So it was cool. It was good to see. I've never been part of a cluster trying to get its feet underneath of itself. So it's kind of cool to see that happen in the very early stages. I'm from the Boston area, right? So I've been spoiled the 12 years that I've been doing this. You get to see, arguably the strongest robotics cluster in the world, certainly in the top 5, in the world, right? And they're so well organized. So I think they're trying to figure out how can they do something like that down there. So it was cool, a couple hundred people there, I would say, but kudos to them. It was a great job, great show. And I'm sure they'll do it again next year, but we'll have to get you down there next time. But great show today, as always. You and Eugene had a chance to sit down with Paul Heitlinger. He's the GM of Nokia AIMS. That stands for the Autonomous Inventory Management System. They just had an announcement, a couple of weeks ago, Mike? What are people going to hear from that interview with you and Gene?
Yeah, we had a chance to talk to Paul to learn actually what the solution is and how they're taking it to market. And Paul gives us an overview of how this technology has come together. I'm not going to spoil all of the what we're going to learn in the interview, but it was a fun conversation, and I certainly learned a lot. Get one more player now in the autonomous inventory management space using drones to fly around the warehouse and keep up with all the inventory.
Yep. So we'll play that a little bit later on in the show. We'll recap the more interesting news stories from the last week or so. But before we do that, we do have to, of course, talk to you folks about our upcoming Robo Business Show, which is just about a month and a half away, if you can believe that. It takes place October 16th and 17th at the Santa Clara Convention Center. I know we'll all be out there probably October 14th at the latest. So if you're based in California and you want to hang out or show us around your facility, what you're building, what you're working on, we'd all love to see you. We're probably going to have to divide and conquer when we're out there, Mike. But again, reach out to us if you have some fun stuff you can show us. But this is going to be another great event. If you liked what we did at the Robotics Summit, I think you'll like this show as well. A few thousand people from the global robotics industry are going to be there, 100 plus exhibitors. We're doing a startup competition. We have the 6 competing startups confirmed. We'll reveal those in the coming weeks. We're going to have like 70 plus experts on our stages. Rodney Brooks, Sergey Levine, one of the leading minds in artificial intelligence, a great state of the industry keynote with ABB. We have DHL, we have NVIDIA, and we have Teradyne Robotics on there. We have Claire Delaney doing a fireside chat. She's the CTO at FarmNG, a great ag robotics startup. She's had a great career. So we're going to talk about a lot of different stuff with her. And then we're going to close it out with Tori Smith. We've talked about this a number of times from ND Addicts. He's building a swallowable robot pill that lets doctors see inside the human body in real time. So Tori's going to take us through that, and he's going to actually swallow one himself. So, and we'll be able to see on the screens behind the stage what the pill is seeing in Tori's body in real time. So kind of wild, but going to be a great show. We talk a lot about the technologies, but we also dive into a lot of the business related aspects of building a robot and building, more importantly, a robotics business. So if you want to learn about everything that we're doing, head over to robobusiness.com to learn about that. Again, October 16th and 17th out in Santa Clara. And if you have any questions, make sure you reach out to me, to Mike, to Gene, to Brianna. Happy to steer you folks in the right direction. Again, hope to see you there. Robo Business, October 16th and 17th out in Santa Clara. On to the news this week, Mike. We're jokingly doing push-ups last week, or talking about doing push-ups. And that was sort of, when did that drop? Late last week, where
Yeah.
Boston Dynamics released a video of its Atlas, its new electric Atlas. That's important to preface in this conversation. It's the new electric version of Atlas doing push-ups. I think when I writing the story, it was 8 push-ups that it did. Only the second video that I've ever seen of the new electric Atlas humanoid from our friends over at Boston Dynamics. But what was your initial reaction to the video? Why do you think they put something out like this?
Well, again, it seems like we got a video, something interesting to talk about humanoid wise every week now, and keep it coming. This gives, it's fun to see. It's fun to see what people are doing. Got some things to even talk about break next week that we're already working on. And so I think the interesting thing here is that with the electric robots, watching the robot do push-ups like that as a controls engineer, Steve, I noticed something. And if you watch, its rear end and its legs, you can actually see the whole thing is still servoing while it's doing push-ups, where with a hydraulic robot, they could just lock, the hydraulic pressure, and the thing's a rigid body in that case. And so, with an electric system, you got to continue to control all the joints all the time. And that's one of the things that's obvious to me. I would actually say they maybe need a little bit of controls work on that, because it's moving around a bit. But again, the thing about even the initial videos we saw with Atlas was that they're not trying to necessarily follow human range of motion with this. Atlas was turning its body 180 degrees, rotating all of its axes like 360 degrees almost. Things that humans can't do unless you're some elite gymnast, I guess, or one of those crazy contortionists on America's Got Talent. But it is pretty wild that why should there be limits? Just because it looks like a human doesn't have to have the same limits in terms of what it does and how it operates, right?
So do you think it's showing off the strength with those actuators? Because I know there's, again, going from the hydraulics to the electric actuation is a major difference, and one that actually enables them to commercialize the robot, right? Which is what they're doing or trying to do. Is that the goal here? Is to show, again, I think people have often misconstrued, their robots in particular not being useful, because they've put out these parkour videos and they've done backflips, and they
Yeah.
have that video of Atlas last year or 2 years ago, maybe it was, last year, carrying a tool bag up, a couple flights of a mock construction site at their facility in Waltham. Obviously those don't reflect real world applications at this point in time, but the fluidity of the motion, the controls that go into that, even if it's a little jerky, which I think is what you're saying, it's still very impressive, right? So in order for them to go tackle some of these more simple, not that it's easy for them to do, but if they're able to make their robots do these complicated motions, like in this video, if you folks haven't seen the video, we'll link to it. It goes from a standing position and it sort of jumps down into a push-up position. That's not an easy thing to do for any robot, right? Let alone a humanoid. And I think it's just showing the level of mobility and control that they're able to produce. Can it be better? Could they shore it up a little? Of course. But isn't it now? I don't know. This is where my mind goes. Like if we're talking about can they reliably go pick up part A and put it into a different location or assemble some doesn't that show that they can do that reliably?
Well, I mean, there's a lot involved there. But I look at it in the sense of the fundamentals of it being a humanoid robot, and we talk about safety all the time. We have how many conversations we have about humanoids and safety,
Yeah.
and the fact that these things are going to fall down. They're going to, what's going to happen when it reaches an e-stop situation and the robot, needs to slump into some safe configuration and then get itself back out of that. Or if it happens to trip over something, the dog or whatever, and falls, how's it going to do that safely? And how's it going to recover from that situation? Because grandma's not going to be able to lift this robot back up if and when it ever finds its way into the home, right? So, they're starting with that, demonstrating the capability of the robot to find its way off the floor,
Huh.
which I think is an interesting sort of subliminal message that they're giving us about the agility of this robot, right?
A recovery technique is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, my 10-year-old will be a grandma by the time these things hit the home. Just so you know. Just a little, we'll throw that in there. But yeah, it is interesting to see. It also had in the video, if you notice, Atlas has a different type of gripper on each arm or on the end of each hand. It's a ball-like end effector, I think is how we described it. It's hard to tell. It's hard to, we don't have up close visualizations where we can really zoom in and see from certain angles, but it definitely looks different than the typical three-fingered gripper that we've seen on Atlas in the first video of this version of Atlas. I don't know if we read anything to that, if that helps balance the robot or not, but it's definitely different, which is something that we made sure to point out. We'll make sure to throw a link into this story into the show notes because we also included a interesting video from another humanoid from 7 years ago. I can't believe this was 7 years ago. A robot called, I think I'm going to pronounce this right, Kengoro, which was built by researchers at the University of Tokyo. And they actually had this robot doing push-ups, sit-ups. I think it did some other exercises as well. Not nearly, I don't know if you watched the video, Mike, it's not nearly as fluid in motion as this Atlas is. It's really not even close. But that's not what they were trying to show there, right? They had something that they called sweating, where the way that they designed it was like a special aluminum that had a bunch of tiny little holes in it, and there was a way for them to cool down the motors, the actuators in the robot to make sure that it didn't overheat while it was doing all this exertion, all this physical activity. But I think you're right. Maybe we're entering. The humanoid Olympics will be 2050, something like that. We'll have to see who did it better. But yeah, I don't think, again, we reached out to Boston Dynamics to try to. They unveiled this push-up video at some conference. I'm not sure exactly which conference it was, but they showed this. So they released the video at that conference, and we reached out to them to try to learn a little bit more about why they did that or what they think it showcases. And they didn't really give us any answer, which is fine. We're not really didn't expect much from them, but it's interesting, right? This just kind of completely came out of left field. We have other humanoid videos in the works, right? That you and I were just debating about back and forth that we can't get into it because this is embargoed until I think it's sometime next week. But they're just every week, right? It seems like that envelope is pushed a little bit further as far as, again, the mobility of these things, which I think is very important, right? As these systems get more efficient and more capable from a mobility standpoint, that's going to open up a lot of different types of applications across different vertical markets, right?
We've got the mobility, the gross mobility, which we're seeing here, And then we've got the fine motor capabilities, as you asked prior. Will these things be able to manipulate fine motor things, pick up things, place things? And we've seen lots of videos from several systems there, demonstrating. So it's sort of converging from both ends, the gross motor and the fine motor. And ultimately these systems are going to be, together in the same system at the same time. We got different companies working on different things. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We should do the humanoid Olympics at the Boston Robotics Summit. That's what we should.
there we go.
2025 Robotics Summit is going to have the the humanoid Olympics. We'll have a couple. We'll probably only have what two or three events, and then we'll have to move on.
I want to see the 100-yard shuffle.
Yeah, yeah. Throw some hurdles in there. That would be great.
Yeah.
That'd be but kudos to Boston Dynamics and all these other humanoid developers. Keep them coming. Moving forward, a new Waymo robo-taxi hit the streets a couple weeks ago. It's their 6th generation robo-taxi, Mike. The company claims much better performance at a much lower price. They really redesigned this from the ground up. But we can get into all the different sensors: 13 cameras, 4 LiDAR, 6 radar, all sorts of external microphones to pick up different types of audio cues. I think the real story here, and I don't know if it was, I think they made this announcement in a not, it wasn't the same announcement. I think it came out a day later, is that they're actually doing this is according to them. We have not verified this in any way, shape, or form, right? We're taking their word for it. But Waymo has said that it's doing 100,000 paid trips a week across its deployments, right? So that's not just San Francisco, that's Phoenix, San Francisco, I think Los Angeles. Those might be the 3. Am I missing one? I think that's it. But there are 3 or 4 locations that they're commercially operating paid robo-taxi services in. They're claiming to be doing 100,000, more than 100,000 paid trips per week, which to me is unbelievable to see. If you go back, really wasn't that long ago. Last year, it seemed like it wasn't that great of a year for the robo-taxi industry as a whole. And I think we've often said that Waymo is clearly the leader in this space. But when you see a number like that, 100,000 paid trips every week, I think that kind of makes it hit home for me, at least.
Yeah, you can begin to do the math on that. That at some point the it's going to become cash positive. When that happens, who knows how many?
What's the average cost of a trip? Even if it's $10, which is probably more than that,
10,
right?
10 to $15,
right?
Yeah,
it's significant money.
So that's good. That's good for the industry, and it's good that again every trip is data that Waymo's bringing back. And I think the other interesting thing about Waymo, as you just said, they have never been held back by let's use the right sensor or more sensors or gather more data here to make the system safe. And that's probably why they are where they are in the industry, is because they've taken an engineering approach. You may not be cost effective, and at some point they'll maybe begin to prune that back to the basic set. But until you know exactly how many sensors is enough and how much feedback is enough to make the system safe, we'll get to that point.
Yeah, and this is not to say Waymo doesn't have its faults either, right? I think I shared with you and Gene and Brianna this morning a video of a Waymo driving the wrong way down in, I think it was somewhere in Arizona near a college campus. These 2 women, they were head on with a Waymo that was going the wrong way. There was that story a couple of weeks ago of all the Waymo robo taxis in the depot. There are alarms going off in the middle of the night. Dozens of Waymo alarms going off at 3 a.m., 2 a.m., something overnight. Annoying the locals for a number of days. So it's not that they don't have their challenges either. But I think again, a lot of this industry, there was a lot of hype. It's taken a lot longer than people had expected. I think there's a lot of skepticism out there still that, is this possible? Can it scale to different climates where the weather's not as nice, where there's rainy weather or snowy weather or different elements that aren't so geared towards driving? I'm not sure that's still the point. I mean, if they're at this point right now in just those 3 areas doing over 100,000 paid trips a week, that's significant. add in, Mike, I know you wanted to hit on this, that they're now picking up and dropping off at the Phoenix airport. I mean,
Yeah.
that just introduces a whole nother. I mean, I might just fly to Robo Business. I might go through Phoenix just so I can have a ride in a Waymo Robo taxi, right? But all these pieces of the puzzle seem to be coming together for them at the right time.
You're going to get off at Phoenix and have Waymo drive you to San Francisco?
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure they need a little bit more money for all the money they've spent to develop these things over the years. I'm happy to contribute to that. I don't know what the cost will be, but I'll expense it. We'll see how that goes. But I think all right. I feel like all they got new funding. I think Alphabet came out and said we're going to commit
Yep.
$5 billion to them going forward. So it's again, I think all these pieces of the puzzle are coming together for Waymo at the right time.
Yeah.
So we'll hope to take a Waymo ride before Robo Business here in a few weeks. Moving forward, I know you wanted to hit on this one. I think it's a little perplexing to you, but Fanuc came out, launched a new robot controller, the R50i, and I think you want to talk about this because of a new feature that they're outwardly promoting and marketing as one of the benefits of this new controller, and that's cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the new R50i that Fanuc just launched for their industrial robots, they're marketing this feature of cybersecurity, which I think is an interesting marketing play, let alone whatever features. It's hard to tell exactly, what new features are in play there. And maybe they want to obfuscate a little bit there so that makes it less hackable. But I think that the key is that they've obtained a third-party certification for international cybersecurity, the IEC 62443-4-1 and 4-2. That's a mouthful. But, I think, again, setting the bar, Fanuc has been a market leader for decades now, Steve. So where goes Fanuc, will go the rest of the industry. So I guess my prediction would be that, if they have come out with a new platform and hardened the system, because, getting hacked is a real threat.
Sure.
And any manufacturer that is deploying Fanuc robots on their production line certainly doesn't want to have those robots hacked and equipment damaged or production compromised by the machines building something. So I think there's value in this, and anyone listening, if you've got thoughts on this, sure to reach out. But I think that the other part of this, why is cybersecurity important? It's because we've seen so many companies, and Fanuc is in particular in the midst of all this, but all the SaaS and RaaS based solutions where companies require that external access through the client's firewall to communicate with the endpoints and all the IoT devices, right? So it's really becoming more and more, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, Accessible, from the web because so many things are connecting and reaching out. So I think we're going to see more of this. Is really my prediction here across the board, as companies that didn't start out to be web-based solutions now have to have some uh, uh, technology in place to support that use case. That remote access is now how people are using all this stuff.
There was a company years ago that used to reach out to me. I think I just found it. Alias Robotics, and they would and cybersecurity is not my forte, right? It's not an area that I've focused on too much in this business. Maybe it's something that we should focus on more because I think you're right. A lot of these systems are vulnerable. I remember years ago, people showed how easy it was to hack I think an autonomous vehicle. But this company and their website is still up there. I was just looking at it while you were talking, and they have tests with all these major robotics companies, and
Mm-hmm.
they just show like, hey, here's here's how easy it is to break into these things. I remember at the time they approached me about wanting to do something, and they had these. I think they put on these virtual events where it was like multiple day events where they were promoting, hey, come see how easy it is to hack into this company's robot. And they would have the name of that company as part of the name of the event and part of the promotional materials. I remember talking to him thinking like that's not the best way to go about, educating that robotics manufacturer about the holes that they have in their system. Like
Yeah.
you want to be more proactive about that rather than calling them out. But
Well,
um,
Stephen, you remember I reported earlier this year, this spring, John Deere, I believe,
all right.
hosted a hackathon, right, where they invited a bunch of college students, white hat hackers, to come for a week, and they basically, they had the engineers to support, all of the technology, and they let the students and the researchers have complete access, and they sort of explained all the APIs and said this is what's there, and they said go for it, try and break into the system, and then let's learn, what it is that you technique that you used, and then we'll figure out how to block that hole or that vulnerability. So, kudos to the companies, and especially companies like John Deere and Fanuc, whose brands mean some, big yellow, big green, right? Some of
Yep.
the leaders in the industry are doing this. It's going to push all the way down the ecosystem, and everybody needs to be owning, this across the entire spectrum, because it just takes one small break in the chain, right, to ruin it for everybody. One to let the bad things happen.
Yep. Final story here. Again, back on the humanoid front, and this, I think, Mike, this might be one of the more impressive videos I've seen in the humanoid era that we're in so far. It's from Limex. They came out and shared a video of the latest generation of the CL1 humanoid, and I'm watching the video right now, and it goes through a makeshift warehouse or back office environment, if you will, probably at the company's headquarters, and it appears to be all shot in with one shot, right? One,
Right.
I'm sure perhaps it took multiple takes. I'm not saying this was the first take, but there's no fancy cuts or edits that are visible in this video. It's just under 3 minutes long, and it's one continuous shot. But take us through this video. You wrote up the story. There's some impressive things where it's grabbing different types of containers. There's humans involved, and humans are trying to mess with the robot and its tasks, right, by moving different objects, right? But quite an impressive video.
Yeah, and I think that again we're seeing each of these companies up the bar, so to speak, raise the bar in terms of what they're doing. The concepts of we joke again, outside of this with the editorial team about all the ways that people can fake a video, right? Between running up the speed, changing the speed at which it's playing back, whether it's teleoperated or whether it's actually the AI doing something. How many takes does it take them to actually get it right? How many cuts do they make to the video to stitch something together? Right. And so they try to address that now. At least these marketing teams are trying to address that here. They're talking about, 1x speed and all one take, and showing that the system, and it really, that shows that the system can reliably do something, right?
Yeah.
Um, from my days of programming the robot, you'd have to adjust things multiple times until you got it to work repeatedly. And that's it. You got to make it at least do it twice before you can
Yeah.
move on to the next thing. But the point is, the video does exactly that. Kudos to the director who sort of laid this all out and described what was going to happen to the team so they could do it in one take. But you're right, the robot moves around, carries things from one shelf to the other. They move the item that the robot was going to pick up, showing that it can adjust in real time, reevaluate the scene, pick up something, and adjust to changes, react to things walking in its path. Someone's pushing a cart through the robot's path. It stops and waits, and then moves on with its mission once that interruption, that obstacle is out of its way. So sort of checks all the boxes you need in terms of what a good video should be. So if you're getting ready to produce the next video for the next couple of weeks, go back and take a look at this, and let's keep up in the game here, because I really like what they're demonstrating.
Yeah. This humanoid looks pretty small too. I don't have the specs of that humanoid right in front of me. But yeah, very cool video. And one thing that struck me while watching this video and just hearing you talk is about the demos and how again, I'm sure we've been fooled over the years, right? We're not immune to that ourselves. Um, this robot, the CL1 from Limex, has just paddle grippers. They don't have the dexterous hands that some of these other
Yep.
humanoids are working on. And did I share this with you guys this week? I'm not sure if I did or not, but it was I found it in an MIT newsletter, and it quoted our good friend Ken Goldberg, and he was talking about how to spot these these well executed videos, these fake videos, or not fake, but how they can easily trick people, right? And he used a humanoid with dexterous hands as an example, and he said a lot of
Mhm.
times they have the hands, and this video from Limex, they're just using the paddles, and they're basically, Ken said, using the shoulders to put pressure onto the box, right? So they're essentially squeezing the box, right, with the
Yep.
shoulders, and not really using. So he's saying other humanoids that have dexterous hands are sometimes really not using the dexterous hands. They're just using them to uh, essentially be paddles, right? And all the lifting and manipulation support is coming from the shoulder joints, which was interesting. But yeah, it's easy. It is easy to fake these videos. Which is, again, we just watched one, and I was joking with you. It looks like you can tell, because this robot that you'll see next week has, you can obviously tell the hands of it are robot hands, but it looks like a human in a costume, right? That's how Tesla first came out with its Optimus years ago, right? It was just a human dressed up in some sort of suit, full body suit, dancing around, right? So it is easy to trick people. Again, I'm sure we've been tricked over the years as well, but these things are getting so sophisticated now. It sometimes is hard to tell what's real, what's not, right? But this was, I think, a great job by Limex with that one shot, 1x speed. So it makes it, I think, a little bit more easily digestible and to understand actually what's going on here.
Yeah, Steve. There was another video that came out of the China humanoid show, and the big news there was that they dressed up a couple of actresses to
Oh yeah,
look like humanoid robots and had them intermingle with the real humanoids. And so, I mean, they did a really great job on all the makeup and what have you. And there's actually a video that talks about the actresses getting put into their costumes. But it's a good question. Does that help or hinder? Does that make people more interested, or does it break the veil of reality here? We could probably debate that for another hour here. But
yeah. I think Aaron Prather posted that video to LinkedIn this morning, right,
yep,
where it showed the behind the scenes of the women getting into the makeup. I think
yep,
if people had the context of the whole story, and said, hey, we're going to work these humans into in with the rest of the humanoids moving around, and see if people can tell, I think they wouldn't be upset. But I think not telling people, and then people find out after the fact, or don't find out, right,
yeah,
and get an inflated view. I mean, an inflated view of robotic capabilities is a major challenge for the industry, and has been for some time, right? So
right.
if you're not telling people the full story up front, I think it's a massive problem. But that's, like you said, a story for another day. But that's it for our news section, and we have you folks covered with all the latest news and information on our network of websites, including the Robot Report, Automated Warehouse, and Collaborative Robotics Trends. On to our featured interview now. Mike, you and Gene had a chance recently to catch up with Paul Heitlinger from Nokia AIMS. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we had a chance to learn about the new drone-based inventory system, AIMS, from Nokia. And what, Steve, I got to tell you, I was a little confused as to why a phone company was rolling out a warehouse inventory solution, but I guess I'm dating myself here because Nokia hasn't made handsets for more than a decade, so they're no longer in the handset. And really, as I talked to Paul during this, both in the green room before the interview, and as you'll hear from here in just a minute, no GPS in this, and yet they are self-positioning. They know. Common question I ask everybody that's running an automated system in the warehouse is, how do you keep from getting lost? Right,
Yeah.
because warehouse aisles are notorious for looking the same. For a machine to know where it is and not get lost in aisle 5 or 25, right? And he says that's their IP. That's what they've done here. They've designed a system that uses proprietary vision-based localization technology. They don't have to put any April tags or any QR codes or anything in the warehouse. They can stay localized, and this is technology that was developed by Bell Labs, which was acquired by Nokia. And so this is Bell Labs innovation. And so they this came up with this innovation at Bell Labs, and they said, "Hey, let's commercialize this in inventory management." And that's how Nokia finds itself now as a supplier of inventory management software and drones. So the division is young. They just started rolling out some pilot customer warehouses this summer and expect to make a business now leveraging the Nokia brand and market reach.
What a journey it's been.
Yeah.
Jeez. The Bell Labs, yeah, very highly regarded, right? So certainly doesn't sound like this will be the last type of robot that maybe you'll see from Nokia going forward. But here's Paul Heitlinger from Nokia AIMS.
All right, today on the podcast, we've got Paul Heitlinger. He's the general manager for the autonomous inventory monitoring services at Nokia. Paul, welcome to the Robot Report podcast.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, tell us a bit about yourself.
So, as you said, I'm the general manager of AIMS. I've been here for 2 years now, this month, actually. So I was brought in by Nokia to help commercialize what was originally a startup, or what is a startup, but was originally a project that spun out of Bell Labs. And it was a research project, which I'll get into in a minute. But my job was basically to take an idea and a project and a proof of concept that we were doing with a vertical farming operation here in New Jersey and turn it into a real commercial business in the warehouse space. So just quickly, my background, I'm originally from Australia. I've been here 25 years. I've done all sorts of different stuff. I've done startups. I've been a strategy consultant. I've worked for Citigroup. I've worked for Verizon, you name it. So never worked for Nokia before, and here we are. But let me give you a bit of a background as to AIMS and the origin story of AIMS, because it's kind of an interesting story. So Nokia Bell Labs was the origin of where this idea got started. So Bell Labs, I don't know if you or your audience have heard of Bell Labs, but it's the storied research institution that's been around for like 80 years, 100 years, something like that. Its researchers have won 10 Nobel Prizes, and it does all sorts of research, both on behalf of the rest of the Nokia organization. And Nokia is a global telecom enterprise services company, so it does a lot of stuff in the network space for both enterprise, for wireless services, for data centers, and things like that. But it also does a lot of research in other areas like AI, computer vision, machine learning, and all sorts of crazy stuff as well. One of the projects they were working on was with a vertical farming operation here in New Jersey, and they were looking at how to automate the monitoring of plants in an indoor structure. So if you think of vertical farming, indoor farming, it's like herbs and fruits, small vegetables, mostly herbs though, on racks, so soil on racks with controlled lighting, controlled environment. The idea being that you can increase the yield under controlled environments. You don't need to use pesticides or anything like that. It's all natural. And you can do, the yields and the density of the crops are much higher because you're stacking the crops vertically. They're not just in a two-dimensional space. But they have to be monitored. And they were working, there was a relationship with Bell Labs, with the president of Bell Labs, Terry Klein, and they were looking at, well, how can we automate that? And the idea they came up with was putting a camera on a drone, automating the drone, and then taking images of all the crops and then using ML to figure out how the crops are going. And so that was the genesis of AIMS. Then they started saying, well, is this a business that we can commercialize? And in the research that they were doing, they said, well, that's very similar to the warehouse industry, racking indoors. How can we apply that to the warehouse space? And it's a much larger opportunity. And so that was the genesis of AIMS. So we pivoted to the warehouse space. It got spun out. And when I say spun out, we're still within Nokia, but we spun out of Bell Labs. And so we're part of Nokia, but we're an independent startup, an incubated startup within Nokia. And we act totally autonomously, so we don't really have a lot of connections with the rest of the business, so there is some overlap. And we rely on the business to support us. So the Nokia has said, hey, we want to make this a successful business. we're going to invest in it. So they're like a sole investor in AIMS, and we are going to turn this into a real business. So that was 2 years ago. So since then, we launched commercially last year with our first customer. We announced them publicly. It was Graybar. They're a large electrical distributor in the US. So we launched with them here in New Jersey, and since then we've grown to a number of other sites. And the value that we provide is basically, if you think about a warehouse, you think about cycle counts, and the cycle counts and inventory counts are done by human workers. And the human workers are basically auditing. I don't need to go into too much detail. I'm sure most of your listeners understand cycle counting, but you're applying a human problem to a human problem, right? So the human problem was misplaced inventory in the first place, and now you're applying humans to fix that by doing human things of investigating, counting, looking at barcodes and product IDs or LPNs. And it's low value work. I think everybody knows it's very low value work. Nobody really wants to do it. In times of high churn, it's not something that you want to keep having people relearn and figure out how to do. You don't want people to call in sick because then you're not cycle counting. So basically what we do is we automate the cycle count process using an autonomous drone. And the drone will basically go into a warehouse, start at position A, and fly up and down the whole time, scanning or taking images of every inventory location. So we know the locations of every bin and bay. And we will take a picture or multiple pictures of every location, and we look for barcodes or human readable text. So whatever the customer uses to identify product in that location, we will match that back we'll do a pull from the customer's WMS or ERP system, and we'll match back what we actually see in every inventory location with what the WMS thinks is in that location. And we provide the customer a very nice report or UI that says, hey, here's all the locations that inventory is misplaced. Here's where it's lost. Here's where we found it. Here's where there's empty bins or empty inventory locations where there's nothing there. And then things like, well, your WMS thinks that's empty, but there's something there, or vice versa. It should be empty, or it's not empty, and that should be empty. And we give the user, the customer, a very nice report that has all that information. So that's what we do in a nutshell. I can go into some more features like box counting that we've recently introduced. We can talk about some of the really hard technical problems that flying a drone indoors without a GPS and how hard that is to actually solve. But that's it in a nutshell. So basically what we're providing is a very efficient, reliable, accurate service to customers that automates this repetitive, low-value job that humans were doing and allows them to do more higher value stuff that they wouldn't normally be able to do. So we provide a very high level of ROI to the customer. So I'll stop there. That's the basics. That's the origin story of AIMS. And let me see if you have any questions.
Well, no, thank you, Paul. You actually did anticipate some of our questions, and our automated warehouse site and audience, I'm sure, are familiar with the challenges of cycle counting and sending humans around, with a clipboard or on a cherry picker to do
Right.
that counting. But you mentioned that you pivoted. Obviously, Nokia is known for telecommunications, and then you went into precision agriculture, vertical agriculture, and IoT, and now into warehousing. How long did that change take? And how did you identify the warehousing market as like, okay, this is where we could really have value? And are you still in agriculture as well?
So it's a good question. So the business, when they looked at, so Bell Labs does two different things. They both do research on behalf of the wider Nokia business groups. So they'll do research, the big one is 6G, wireless, and how to improve wireless and networking and all that sort of stuff, optical networking. But some of the stuff that they do is nothing related to the business. So they look at things opportunistically and they say, is there an opportunity here? Is it something we can apply the knowledge and the research we have to a particular business problem? So they will partner with entities outside of Nokia And if it's something that they think is worth pursuing, they'll investigate it, do a POC, and apply their knowledge and their research to that problem. So this was one of those things, right? So Nokia does have actually experience in drones. Nokia has a separate business part of what's called Cloud and Network Services. And I don't know if you've read, there's been some public announcements in Europe where we have actually a huge drone, a 6-propeller drone that flies outdoors and is used for public services. It's GPS connected, it's cellular connected, and it's a massive business and opportunity. But that's a big outdoor drone business. There's not a lot of overlap with what we're doing, but the origins were both in the drone business. So we do have experience in drones as such. So the vertical farming business was started through a relationship that Bell Labs had with this particular company. And then when they went through the process of figuring out, we don't do research for research's sake. We do research because ultimately it'll either go into a business group and become a product or a feature, or it can be commercialized. And so as part of that, after the POC, it's like, well, what is the commercial opportunity here? Vertical farming, yeah, that was one of the focus areas, but it's not a huge space. The warehouse space, as part of the due diligence, was a much bigger opportunity with very similar, probably 80% of the capabilities of the drone being very similar. And so the decision was made to focus on the warehouse space because it's, in the US, there's 25,000 warehouses. In Europe, I believe there's 25,000 warehouses. Rest of the world, I don't know, double that. It's massive, right? Massive opportunity. The other good thing about the warehouse space is, from a customer point of view, you sell to one customer, and it's not generally just one warehouse, it's multiple warehouses. So for example, Graybar, we start with one warehouse, but there's 20, 30 other warehouses. So you prove the value in one location, and it opens up a much larger opportunity after that. You don't have to go and acquire each one of those warehouses individually if you're proving their value from the first one. The other point is that the vertical farming space is very nascent. It went through some turmoil in the last couple of years. It's generally venture backed, so their funding isn't generally as good as a warehouse. So it's not an area that we're focused on right now, but we acknowledge the origins of where we got started, and that's where we got started.
Interesting. So you had the drone technology in a different area. Talk a little bit about, are you using the same custom developed drones, or are you using a commercial off the shelf drone for this? What's the drone basis?
Yeah, so the drone, we look at the drone as a means to an end. We don't really care what the drone does as long as it can meet our needs and our capabilities and we can write the software for it. So the drone's actually from a third party. It's not DJI, it's actually a US-based drone reference. So it uses a Qualcomm chipset, so there's no issues with export controls or anything like that. But basically we look at it as, it's like a Tesla with propellers, and we buy the hardware and then we program everything else. So the autonomy, the localization, the computer vision, all the pipelines, how the images get off the drone, all that sort of stuff is what we've built natively within AIMS. And, it's kind of interesting. There's also, you start with an MVP and you progress to something that's more robust. So even how we got started in the vertical farm space to how we initially launched with our first customers to how we're doing it now, there's been a progression of capability in terms of the autonomy and localization. So the drone, when we first started, would fly like this, right? It was a little drunk. We call it them drunken flights at the beginning because it looked like the drone was drunk. And we would do its mission, but it didn't look smooth, right? To the point now where the drone flies like rock solid. It looks like it's, if it was a drunken flight before, this is like the straight-laced, buttoned up sort of drone. And so there's a lot of learning. We have a huge amount of intelligent developers and engineers, like very highly skilled guys. We've done a great job, if I say so myself, on the folks that are building this out. And we've really built a solution that is extremely robust. So when you're flying around in a warehouse, it has to work, right? So a customer's only going to use this if you're providing value, if it's more efficient than the human, if it's more accurate than the human, right? If it does a better job overall. So we can't have crashes. We can't have the liability of damage. We can't have the liability of it flying off and hitting anything or anyone, right? So it's been one of the priorities that we have a very stable flight. And we're at the point now where the drone will fly and you can leave it for 25 minutes as long as it takes, before the battery runs out, 30 minutes, and it will be rock solid. It'll hit every mark. When I say mark, every inventory location. It will capture the right images. It'll scan the barcodes or the text on the boxes, again, as long as we can see it. And it does a really good job of that. So this is a true marriage of both hardware and software. Again, I think of us as the Apple or the Tesla of automated cycle counts or autonomous drones, because we're really marrying the hardware. And while it's off-the-shelf hardware, and it's not consumer level drone, it's a commercial drone that if you bought the drone, it wouldn't do anything, right? You need to build the software for it, but it's really marrying that hardware and building the software for it to bend the hardware to our needs and get the data that we need in order to provide that analytics and the information back to the customer to get them what they need. So yeah.
But I think it's interesting. I had an aha while you were telling us about, the response about what type of drone you're using in terms of who and what Nokia is. I mean, we've thought about Nokia for the longest time as a cell phone telecommunications provider, but at the end of the day, you're an embedded systems developer, right? Talking about the chipset and the software from the chip level interaction all the way up to the enterprise level, that software that runs above that. Is that a better way to think about who Nokia is today and where Nokia might go in the future?
Yeah, I mean, don't think about AIMS. Don't imply anything about Nokia from what AIMS is doing. So Nokia, you're right, is not the cell phone company. We sold that a long time ago.
Yeah.
And Nokia handsets are made actually under license by another company. But the core of what Nokia does is communications and networking equipment, right? Plus and enterprise solutions. But Nokia has a lot of experience in that, and it builds its hardware. So a lot of the hardware is in-house developed. In our particular case, in AIMS's particular case, we want to build the best solution, and we don't see our skills or capability in building the hardware. There's so many hardware suppliers out there. There's lots of different options. It's an expensive thing to do, right? Mm-hmm. There's no IP for us to build our own hardware, at least at this point, versus the benefits of using an off-the-shelf drone that meets 99% of our needs. And it allows us to focus on, we think about this as providing a service to the customer. It's not about the hardware. The hardware is a means to an end, right? Mm-hmm. So what is the best way and the most efficient way and the most reliable way that we can provide that data to our customer? In this particular case, there was a drone that met our needs. It had all the sensors we needed, the cameras, the multiple cameras, the multiple sensors, the size was right, and it was a perfect fit for what we needed. And we spent a lot of time researching. We spent time working with other drones and Frankensteining some drones earlier on to try and build our own, but it just didn't make sense. And our solution is now to use this off-the-shelf drone, and we customize it. We do add additional things to it that aren't included, and we are working with another supplier to customize the drone further so it has a particular look and feel, but the underlying hardware technology sensor package is based on a third party's solution. But there's no need for us to build that.
So, Paul, let's get back to the application itself. You talked about some of the challenges that warehouse operators face and retailers face with inventory. How specifically did you design AIMS to address those inventory challenges? Because it's, a person on the ground with whatever tablet or system you're using is very different from a drone that's collecting or sending data. How did you go about that? Did you look at what else was already out there, or did you say, okay, if we were to solve this problem, these are the steps we need to build to get there?
Yeah, I mean, this is the perennial startup thing, right? How do you find product market fit, and how do you build an MVP? So, what's the minimum viable product look like? And so, when we got started, it was both research, reading, and to be honest, we didn't have much or any warehouse or logistics experience, so we're all self-taught. We're experts now, but at the beginning we were all self-taught. So it's amazing what you can read online. In fact, there's theories that you can become an expert in anything just by spending a good 3 months reading and researching. And I honestly believe that. I used to be a strategy consultant in another life. And one of the benefits of being a strategy consultant is you can pick up any industry and become an expert in it after 3 months of being immersed in it. So, we immersed ourselves in the life of warehouses. So that was both, research, reading reports, seeing what our competitors were doing, but it's also talking to customers. So we spent a lot of time talking to customers, right? And so we learned what customers were looking for when it came to inventory counting and cycle counting. And then we launched with our first customer, and that was invaluable to get a lot of feedback. And we made a lot of updates. We made a lot of changes based on that first customer. They were very, very supportive. So kudos to Graybar. I'll give a shout out to them. They were very supportive, and they looked at this as a partnership, which I think, for a startup is totally invaluable when you're getting started. Having that first customer who's willing to be patient with you and go the course with you and give you all that feedback. And there were days where it didn't work, and we had an arrangement with them where we wouldn't bill or we'd give them credits for the days it didn't work, so that they were never out of pocket, but they were willing to spend the time with us to give us that feedback and for us to learn from them. And we continued building out the product, and then we got our second customer. Same thing, we got our feedback, and it was all based on customer feedback. And then we started going to trade shows. And then talking to customers and trade shows, it was, this is great, but we want to see this. Or, if only you had this, we would use it. We had a lot of sales meetings. And so that was basically how we've been building out the product. It's all based on customer feedback. We're very agile. We iterate. So we have a team focused on the drone side, which is, we know what we have to do and we know where we have to go. We have to make it stable. We have to do all these other things. But we have a team focused on the analytics and the UI and customer interaction. And that's generally where we get all the feedback, and we iterate, in 3-week sprints. We're always updating, adding new features, testing things out, getting feedback from customers. One of the things when we pitch to customers now is that, all our early adopter customers get a seat at the product development roundtable, right? So if customers, we're at the stage where we can where we can continue to integrate features that customers want, right? And generally these features are not massive changes. They're, if you showed this data in a different way, or, our barcodes are different, or this is different, or we use a different WMS, so now we got to do a different integration. Then that's the feedback that we're rapidly integrating and developing. And our customers love that because they almost get like a bespoke, I don't want to say bespoke, but it's almost like a bespoke solution where we're building to their needs. 90% of what we do is what everybody wants to do when it comes to cycle counts, but everyone has these little twists and differences that we implement. And the more that we do that, the more we're able to attract other customers. I just want to add one thing. The biggest thing that we implemented, the biggest thing that we heard from potential customers was the one thing that all these automated solutions can't do well is counting. Like, it's called cycle counts and inventory counts, but no one was really counting, right? There's various ways that competitors are doing it, but no one was actually counting. We came up with a way to, at least in about, we think 90% of the cases, on a single pallet, that if you, as a human, a cycle counter, could reasonably count the number of boxes, even if they're occluded, right? We'll never do 2 pallets deep. And we can't look inside a carton or a box, but we can count the visible boxes, cartons, eaches on a pallet in a location. Even if they're occluded, we can give an accurate inventory count now that I think is an industry first. And that's really, really compelling, because now we're saying the product's in the right place or the wrong place. Here's empty bin locations. And now here's the count of what was actually in that inventory location, right? And we're finding that is really invaluable to the customers, and it's really putting the count in inventory counting and cycle counts that wasn't there before. And now, the feedback that we got from customers was, it's great that you can tell us the product's in the right place in the wrong place, and for full pallet loads, yeah, great. But for pallets that are broken, then that was less useful if they need to count. And sometimes customers didn't care as much, or they would cycle count less often. So there's still a benefit. But now we're really doing everything related to cycle counts. Again, can't do everything. Can't count inside, pallets that, boxes that are open and eaches are taken out. Can't count multi-depth, multi-pallet depth. But for, the general bread and butter of what a warehouse does, of a pallet with boxes on it that are broken apart, we can now count those and report that back to the customer, which is huge.
Interesting. So we've been talking to several of your competitors over the last couple of months. It's been an interesting topic here. It seems like the drone-based inventory counting has come of age here in the last year or so, and I think you're proof that it's a viable market. One of the things that is important, you talk about being able to see and to count, but more importantly, in the core operation of the robot, is staying localized in the warehouse, because all the warehouse looks alike. So every inventory aisle looks like every other inventory aisle. And, if you don't know exactly where you are, then you can't keep track of which space you're actually counting. So that had to be one of the early problems that you guys had to solve. And I'm sort of curious, because I asked the same question of all of the developers here. How are you solving that sort of classic problem?
Yeah, and I'd love to hear all their answers, because I'm sure all the competitors all look at, well, how are they doing it? You go to trade shows and you go, they're doing it this way, or they're doing it that way.
Yeah.
So that's kind of funny. But honestly, I think we're doing it the best way. So, there's multiple ways to do it, right? So localization, as you mentioned in the warehouse, is a difficult problem to solve. So how does the drone not get lost when there's no GPS? And it has to localize accurately to centimeter level, accuracy.
Yeah.
And when we got started, it was like, what's the easiest way to do it? It's, well, let's put what we call fiducials or APL tags around the place, right? Mm-hmm. So I think some of our competitors use that. So that requires you to print out all these either stickers or tags, and you have to put them, think about hundreds of thousands of square feet of warehouse, how many tags you have to put around. And that's how we got started. But it's expensive, and it takes a lot of time, and you have to bother the warehouse manager, because you need to get on the scissor lift and put tags up high, and maybe you don't have to put them all the way up high, but you still have to put them everywhere. And so that was great. But our philosophy is to minimize any impact to the customer, right? We want to be able to get in there and do no harm, basically. We don't want to have any impact to the operations of a customer site. We don't want to leave a trace of what we do. So our engineers, the big brains that they are, have developed, and this is all proprietary to AIMS, have developed a technology where we localize based purely on computer vision, what the drone sees, or what the cameras see. So the drone knows where it starts at the beginning of every mission, and it will look for structure and navigate based on what it sees. So it looks for certain things in the warehouse that are previously known to us. So we use machine learning and computer vision and a lot of training. But once that's done, that's an upfront thing, and most of that applies to most warehouses. Once the drone starts flying, we know exactly where it is. And then there's lots of sensors on the drone to keep tabs of where it is as it moves around. Let's say 90% of it is camera-based. Mm-hmm. But just like a Tesla is 100% camera-based as it drives around and uses neural nets to navigate around, we do something similar. Now, we do have to know what to look for. And we're looking for structure in the warehouse. But again, most warehouses are very similar. There's some variations. And so we use that to fly around. It requires no infrastructure changes, no tags, no nothing in the warehouse before we fly. But that's proprietary, and that's something that we're really proud of. The team always want to go to these robotics conferences and talk about all the work that they've done around this because it's very cool. And I'm like, no, you can't talk about anything that like lets anyone else know how we do it. But I mean, it is really super cool. I mean, it's I don't understand it because I'm not an engineer, but I know that it works really well. And the latest version, we just released an update this month. We call it Nova internally, but it's a whole new mapping solution. The way we map is now updated. It's much more extensible and reliable. But we have a new localization and autonomy algorithm that we've just implemented that makes the drone rock solid, knows where it is, very, very accurate. Yeah.
So with the accuracy of the drone's operations, then you obviously are able to collect better data. But can you tell me briefly how much do you need to send the drones out, or how many drones are in a facility? Is it something where there's constantly a bunch of drones hovering around, or is it something that can be done periodically? And how much do you have to tailor the data to different WMSs or different operations? Or it sounded from what you were saying earlier that things are pretty standardized on that side of things, but disadvantage of drones versus ground-based systems is that they have a certain endurance.
Right. Fair enough. So the last question first. So in terms of tailoring the data to each customer, so that was something we realized earlier on, right? So the first time we launched, it was like, well, it's kind of fixed, and every time we wanted to make a change or like if a customer wanted to see different data, we would have to hard code that in, and we went, well, then we got the second customer. It's like, oh, they actually want to see different things, right? And empty bin mismatches might be more important to one customer and less important to another customer. Lost versus mismatch, even terminology. So what we ended up doing was we went through and thought about all the different scenarios that customers might want to see or do want to see. And then what we did was we just simply built all these filters. We call them filters. And we built them into a settings tab. And each customer, each user can go in and say, oh, here's all the things that are important to me. Misplaced inventory, empty bins that are mismatched, found inventory, whatever they want, tick the boxes they want. And then the UI will just present them those filters. So today, the data, the columns, the location, the count, the IP, the IDs, product IDs or LPNs or whatever they're tracking is consistent, the layout. But how they filter that data is all customizable. So users can set up the filters however they want to see it. So that was a great thing. And we're always updating the UI and enhancing that experience based on that feedback. And so far, that's been a good outcome. In terms of endurance, you're right. So, and I'll be honest, we're the newest kid on the block, so we've had less time on market. So today, we're single drone capable at a time. We fly one drone at a time. But we have a roadmap, and our goal is to implement lots more capability. So our sweet spot today is, probably warehouses up to about 400,000 square feet. 100,000 to 400,000 square feet is our sweet spot, and being open and transparent. So one drone will do wall to wall in, depending on the size of the warehouse, 2 to 4 weeks, which is still much faster than cycle counting or wall to walls, or cheaper than wall to walls if you had the whole team doing it, right? But generally, there's an ROI there. But our goals are to do 2 drones at once, 3 drones, orchestration, all that sort of stuff. So we have a roadmap through the rest of this year and into next year where, we built what we have in basically 2.5 years. So I mean, from when we're doing vertical farming to now, it's been about 2.5, 3 years. And we've come, and we have a relatively lean team, especially compared to our competitors. And we've done an amazing amount of time, amazing in a short amount of time. Our goal is to double that, right? We want to do all the things that allow us to fly in million square foot warehouses and do the same thing that we're doing in a 200,000 square foot warehouse in the same time as a 1,000,000 square foot warehouse, right? We want to continue to enhance the data that we provide our customers. So three-dimensional maps. And one of the benefits, again, I don't mean to be touting the AIMS horn, but one of the benefits of AIMS is that we are part of Nokia and we continue working with Bell Labs. And Bell Labs has huge teams working on digital twins and computer vision and ML and 3D recreation of things from 2D images. So we work with them continuously on enhancing our products. They're researchers, but they're doing all the upfront research, and then we implement that into our products. So there's going to be a lot of new things. Box counting was the first that came out of that, right? Very practical and tangible, but now we'll start doing a little more eye candy. And again, based on customer feedback, we'll continue to enhance that and make it nicer and better and more useful. So, we want to get to a point where the drone flies around and we'll create a 3D map of the customer's warehouse that they can go in and look at what's actually there in 3 dimensions. Maybe they can start doing things like playing Tetris and move boxes around and start doing optimizations. We don't know, but that's kind of where we're going to end up. We see ourselves as the drone is just collecting the data, right? We need to make that as accurate as possible. Now, what can we do with that data, right? We're going to apply AI and ML to it. We're going to do data analytics. We're going to create digital twins, all that sort of stuff. We're at the early stages now. So there's just, it's all upside from here.
Great, Paul. Well, very interesting to learn where you are. Obviously, there's a lot to this, and we look forward to following your path going forward. So I want to thank you for joining us on the podcast today, and we'll stay in touch. So thank you.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Eugene. It was great to meet you both, and can't wait to talk to you again.
Awesome stuff there. As always, any closing thoughts from you, Mike, on that chat?
Well, I'm just amazed that this market continues to grow. Inventory management, I always thought was one of the holy grail applications, Steve, when I first got into mobile robotics a decade ago, because I thought, what a great use. And, whether it's in the front of house, in the store, or whether it was in the warehouse, I recognize this was an important application to automate a decade ago. And it's taken us 10 years to get to this point. But with multiple suppliers now, it's real. And lots of different ways of approaching it, but this is being solved now.
How many? I'm putting you on the spot. What, 3 or 4 major drone-based inventory management players, something like that?
3 or 4 drone-based, and a couple of ground-based ones as well. We've had folks on the podcast here, and we'll continue to talk to these innovators as they bring it forward with us.
Yeah. Thanks again to Paul for the time there. Before we go, we got to tell you about our Robo Business event one more time, taking place October 16th and 17th out at the Santa Clara Convention Center. It's going to be a great show for the commercial robotics development industry. A couple thousand people there talking how to build robots, what are the new enabling technologies. We also dive a lot into how to build and scale robotics businesses. So we'll talk about that. Fundraising, and Mass Robotics is doing a 2-part startup boot camp where they'll break down all the different pieces of the puzzle that are often overlooked when you're trying to start and then grow a robotics startup. Again, we're going to have 70 plus experts on our stages, nearly 100 exhibitors on the show floor. It's going to be a great couple of days. If you want to learn what we're doing, if you want to get involved, there's still some time to grab some expo space or maybe get into a talk. You can head over to robobusiness.com, or you can reach out to any one of us over at the Robot Report. We can help steer you in the right direction. But again, this is put on by the same folks who put on the Robotics Summit and Expo earlier this year in Boston. If you attended that show, I think you'll like what we're doing out in Santa Clara on October 16th and 17th at Robo Business. So again, head over to robobusiness.com. And we hope to see everybody in 6 or 7 weeks here. So it's coming quick, and we hope to see you guys all there. But that's going to do it for episode 161 of the Robot Report podcast. Thanks again to everybody for tuning into the show. Thanks to Paul Heitlinger from Nokia AIMS for joining us on the show as well and lending us his time and expertise. New episodes of the podcast drop each week. You can find us anywhere you listen to your podcast. Please subscribe, leave us a rating, give us a review. Really appreciate that. This episode was produced and edited by Mike Oitzman. My name is Steve Crow. Thanks so much, folks, for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.